Welcome to the Executive Insights podcast, brought to you by AWS. My name is Ben Cabanas, Director of Technology and Customer Solutions at AWS. With me today is Simon Davies, GM for Core Banking at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, also known as CBA. Simon, thanks a whole lot for joining us today here in the podcast studio. You've just done something really incredible at CBA. You've migrated CBA's entire core banking platform to AWS and to the cloud. Given that your platform manages almost 40% of Australia's liquidity for over 15 million Australians, what was at stake for this migration for both CBA as well as for Australia's economy?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ben. Really excited to be here, and very proud of what we've achieved. As you said, stakes were enormously high. Core banking is the transactional system that sits behind, or really at the center of most banks. It's where all your transactions are posted, usually where your customer master is, where all of your accounts are. And certainly at CBA, our particular core banking system accounts for about 90% of our total customer and account data. So when you sort of think about the architecture of our technology ecosystem, in a very real sense, all roads lead to core banking. So enormously critical for us. And as you point out, almost 40% of Australia's liquidity. So almost 1 in 2 times anyone makes a payment, transfers money, buys a coffee, whatever in Australia, it goes through this particular system. You could kind of think of this as really a piece of critical national financial services infrastructure. Now, that obviously means that when we're kind of contemplating this change, everyone developed I'd say a very healthy sense of anxiety. We definitely understood the risks, but the obligation that we had to our customers, but to the entire nation. It's certainly a very complex technical challenge, but more than that, when we sort of think about the fact that this is the heart of our bank and the broader institution, broader organization relies on this particular system, it's also a massive organizational challenge, massive cultural challenge. It's not often that a change of this magnitude touches so much of the organization. Getting everyone to coordinate behind that was a challenge in itself.
Yeah, and how did you, given the criticality of the system, how did you get stakeholder alignment around moving this critical system to the cloud?
It's really about transparency. I think in a lot of ways, the way that you manage risk, the way you communicate with your customers, but internally, it was an exercise in being very clear about the why. Why do we need to do this? As you might imagine, in any large organization, there are a lot of competing priorities. Or some of these organizations are quite distributed as well, and it's the value of a change like this is not even across every part of the organization. So when we reach out to all of our stakeholders, primarily, we do need to make sure that we had that top-down support, that from our leadership, from our board all the way down, this is recognized as a necessity, something that we need to do. So we communicate initially on that basis, but you also need to communicate in a way that sort of acknowledges and respects the different use cases and the different needs of all of your teams within the organization.
I'm going to ask you a little bit of a selfish question because I am Australian. I'm based in Sydney. I'm a CBA customer. What does this mean for your customers?
It means quite a lot for our customers. So in very obvious ways today. So for example, I don't know if you ever noticed before, but when you use the CBA app, you might make a payment, and then you'd go back to the home screen after making your payment. You'd have to refresh to update your balance. And that was because there was about a 6-second latency from when you made that payment, gets committed to our database on this core banking system, and then it updates essentially the back end of the digital app. Now, with this change, one of the major improvements was a massive improvement in response time, particularly like event streaming response time. So what you'll see now is absolute real-time response. But that event streaming improvement is far more than just giving you a real-time balance update on your app, because we heard from Matt Garman about the importance of getting your data into the cloud. And really what we're doing in AWS is, as you may be aware, AWS is CBA's primary cloud, and we've got increasing investment in there, and all of our innovation really happens within that ecosystem. So being able to move our data through that ecosystem with less friction, more quickly, has been a real game changer for us in a number of ways, both what we're doing today, but what we're building next.
Yeah. So performance, a much more seamless customer experience. That's great. That's something for me to look forward to. You mentioned that this core banking system, as it is for most banks, is like the lifeblood of all of your systems, right? So much flowing through it, but it also has tentacles into so many other systems across the bank. How did you manage all of those integrations along? And I'm sure it's a massive amount of complexity.
We were in the fairly fortunate position of having done a major modernization of our core banking system about 16 years ago. So a lot of the sort of tech debt and legacy that would have held us back if we had not done that was resolved and continuously adapted over the last decade and a half. What that meant for us is the approach for making this change, although there was a transformation of the underlying technology platform and there was new features and enhancements brought in, we were able to take a look at this as, well, we've got contracts upstream that hit all of our channels predominantly from both the self-service channels like the banking app, but also our assisted channels like that you'd see when you go into the branch. And all of our downstream systems, so where we're feeding reporting, mostly in sort of risk, treasury, those sorts of things, we were able to keep those contracts completely consistent. So what this really became an exercise in then is testing that each of those contracts was faithfully maintained while we made a massive change in the middle.
So Simon, just to put this in perspective for the audience, you are quite literally running the world's largest SAP core banking deployment. It's processing up to 4,000 transactions per second. With the criticality of a system like this, what are some of the things that you have to consider as you're planning this migration to the cloud?
Yeah, very good question. I actually like the quote that our AWS solution architect has about this. He calls it the most demanding SAP system for performance and reliability on AWS in the world. So I think that's
Nice.
a pretty cool claim to fame. And certainly we moved from our old mainframe-based database to high memory, high performance SAP HANA database. We actually saw significantly decreased response time, so about 30% by quite a margin. So that's been able to give us a whole bunch of new opportunities, both in improving the current experience, but building brand new experiences for our customers with capacity that we never had before.
Yep.
The other thing that's been really cool about this is we actually reduced our infrastructure costs by moving from mainframe specialized compute to AWS. We dropped by 30%, which is huge for us. And that's before we even start looking at all of the efficiencies that we get through moving to full stack automation. So that's like provisioning automation, certainly, but a lot of operational automation as well. Everything from like failovers, scale out, scale up, patching, start, stop, all of that kind of stuff takes out literally hundreds of manual touch points per month. So there's even more opportunity to take cost out.
Yeah, that's great. So your reliability position improved. I'm sure there was a lot of testing along the way for RTO and RPO. What is the biggest lesson learned, right, in terms of reliability and architecting this system for reliability?
I think we came from a like mainframe based system in the past, and we've heard a lot about AWS Transform and the lessons around that, and I think the big one, the big takeaway for us was mainframe had been absolutely like rock solid for us, very very reliable platform, but just like rocks, not particularly flexible. We had issues with operational agility and with like skill and knowledge attrition. The people that operated these platforms had sort of very very specialized, very niche roles for top to bottom in our stack. There were 8 different teams who specialized in different components of that mainframe. And actually, maybe a bit of a story, but we had an issue about 18 months ago, and we got these 8 teams on the call. What's the problem? And they're all looking at their particular pane of glass, all of the signals and the telemetry that they get for their componentry. Like, not my problem, not my problem. All operating in very isolated contexts. So operationally, that was a quite a problematic place for us to be. And we sort of recognized this growing risk. It also meant that because they are such siloed teams operating on this stack end to end, agility suffered. The ability to fix issues, but make changes and innovate was hampered by this complex operational dynamic. So by moving to this new technology stack on AWS, one of our big goals there was to move to like essentially a full stack team, and automate as much as possible. And that's allowed us to have better end-to-end observability of the platform, but more than that, the focus on being able to drive automation within the platform and sort of leading us towards AI ops ultimately, so anomaly detection and self-healing platforms. We can focus less on keeping the lights on today and then more on building what's next for our customers in the future.
That's great, and I think that's just a great lesson learned. I hear it from customers all of the time that, I think the first part is that there's so much tribal knowledge throughout the organization for some of these legacy systems, and then there's also data that's wrapped up in those legacy systems that they can't have access to, right? And so one of the things that we heard from Matt Garman in his reInvent keynote is the importance of data strategy and making that data available to large language models and AI, and so that becomes a value driver for your organization as opposed to kind of this anchor, if you will, that's slowing you down. You talked a little bit about 2 things. One is the importance of data strategy and starting early, and the second one was moving from sort of batch processing to real time. Like in the context of wanting to leverage more AI across the bank, and also with respect to this system, like how did you think about that journey overall for CBA?
Yeah. I mean, real time is huge for us. I mean, we've had a real time core banking system for a number of years, but because of this stack we were on, it was a bit of a closed down ecosystem, and there were sort of architectural and capacity constraints for us to be able to share that data more, without friction. This change has really landed us in this ecosystem of innovation, and our data and this particular platform being 90% of our customer and account data. It's really the richest source of customer behavioral insights that we have in the bank. Being able to move that like seamlessly through the bloodstream has been a game changer. I mean, it's allowed us to enhance things that we've done in the past. Like, we've got a customer engagement engine which kind of looked at based on your behaviors and the types of products you're choosing, this is what we would recommend, like sort of a next best conversation engine. But increasingly we're moving towards behavioral nudges, systems that understand intent but anticipate needs, and nudge customers. This might this would be an improvement to your experience. And it's not just about giving them a more delightful experience, but it's also they trust us with something that's like so sensitive and vital to their lives, right? Their financial well-being. So how do we keep them safer? And being able to do that in real time, or at the speed of our customers' lives, is more important now than ever. Fraud and scams, they're getting much more sophisticated, and the best defense for that is agility and speed.
How did you think about security and privacy in the cloud in particular for this data, for this system?
Yeah, I think security, risk, privacy, it's very easy to think of these as overheads. We had a principle that this needs to be secure by design, and that goes for all of our workloads, certainly. So when we were building this thing, it was always very important that everyone, the engineers who are working on it, the risk teams, our colleagues in cyber who are doing reviews, understand the why of every decision. Understand, so everyone is like very intentional about how we're approaching these, And then it's a very transparent discussion about what trade-offs are we making and what is absolutely non-negotiable.
Going back to exposing some of that real-time data, uh, how do you how is AI changing the way that, not only your customers' expectations, but how you're thinking about providing like differentiating experiences for your customers?
Yeah, we got uh, big ambitions at CBA to be a leader in the generative and agentic AI space, like a lot of organizations. Um, there's this evident AI index, and it tracks the top 100 banks in terms of their adoption of and performance using AI. So very proud to say that CBA this year moved from fifth on that ranking to fourth,
All right.
and obviously
Congratulations.
we want to keep climbing till we get to the top. Thank you. Um, I mean, what we see is the value of this is, as I said before, how do we move at the speed of our customers' lives? How do we anticipate their needs? How do we give them like a hyper personalized, intimate experience? Customers' expectations today are defined by the entire world around them. And if you look at like the Amazon app as an example, like that kind of personalized experience that understands and predicts what they want is exactly what they're looking for in the banking application. Again, something that recognizes their loyalty and gives them um, gives them I guess rewards that recognize the loyalty and that are most applicable for them and that are best going to serve their needs.
Yeah. And also, are you finding like you've had a lot of success, obviously, in getting these systems to the cloud and like earning the trust of your stakeholders as well along the way? Are you finding that it's easier and becoming easier to build those business cases for ancillary systems or new experiences that you want to create?
I definitely think it is. So I guess a couple of things. So firstly, a change of this scale was fantastic in its own right, but it also transformed the culture, right? There are very few occasions when we line up as an entire organization to deliver something that touches basically every point of the organization. So this was sort of instrumental in building that cultural muscle to focus on a single priority, but also in, I guess, redefining the art of what's possible. And as a result of that, like we've seen across the organization, people have looked at what capability we've delivered, and it sparked a lot of imagination for what's possible in like single workloads for single use cases that engineers are building in individual business units. But how do we exploit this more broadly across the whole organization as well?
Yeah.
And so we've got some very big initiatives in the pipeline that will take a lot of advantage of that.
I'm so glad that you brought up culture because that's where I was kind of leading you. And in my experience with customers, that regardless of industry, regardless of size, there's always a little bit of a bespoke culture. What's unique about CBA's culture, just in terms of what others can learn from you, that allowed you to really think big about this approach? What is that sort of special sauce at CBA?
Yeah. I'd probably ground it in our values primarily. Um, we have three core values: care, commitment, and courage. Now, what's been really interesting about that for me is I think care and commitment, they're sort of the easy ones to identify. And I'm sure you've got a recognition portal or something similar at Amazon. We've got something like that. And you look through it, you scroll through it, and if you were to do the analytics on it, you'd see a lot of care and commitment and probably a small single digit percentage for courage. And when we were approaching this, we did this thing in 18 months, and it was like an enormous mountain to climb. I kind of used the analogy of Mount Everest at various points, and I'd like put up pictures of you're at base camp 2, you're 2/3 of the way up, and that sort of thing. But courage was going to be really, really important. And actually, one of the pivotal moments I think for us was we had an offsite at the AWS office in Sydney, and I wanted to really instill like that sense of courage in the team. Um, we did this exercise where we took a couple of the Amazon leadership principles that I thought were particularly relevant. And relevant to courage for me was bias for action, because I think the inaction or that procrastination really stems from fear. Yeah, I'm worried about what the response is. I'm worried that if I do this like straight away, I'm not going to be prepared enough. My answer isn't going to be fully fledged enough. It's not going to be perfect. So I think that was a really useful exercise. Everyone kind of said what they feel a bias for action is. And, to me, that was really about driving courage. And, what makes me like most proud about the team as a result of that is they really accomplished the thing that they themselves thought was impossible. Like I said, that kind of changed. That was contagious across the entire organization. Yeah. And the other thing that I think was important for this in particular was, have you ever seen Ted Lasso? Do you know the show Ted Lasso? If people haven't seen it, it's about this soccer team, and he puts this sign up in the locker room and it just says "Believe" on it, in big blue letters on a yellow sign. At one point early on, I just sent this out via email to the team, and I said, you got to believe in yourselves. There's no reason not to. Objectively, like, you've been working on this for a long time, so objectively, you're the best team in the world to accomplish this. Send this out. And then our project manager, he kind of rolled his eyes and he thought it was a little bit kitsch. Probably a week or two later, I go into the office, and on the wall, someone had printed out the sign and put it up there, "Believe." It became a bit of a rallying cry for us. And you'd kind of see people after a hard conversation, they'd walk past the sign and they'd touch the sign. So I think, the elements that I would focus on for something like this, because it was audacious, it was high risk, high stakes, like courage and belief were absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Such a great lesson. I think great learnings just across the board with the whole effort, the whole initiative. I think both from the criticality of the system, thinking really big about the customer experience and how you could change that. How you thought about reliability in moving to the cloud, setting the scene with data strategy and a transformative data strategy for the bank, and of course, just to summarize, I think it's really inspiring to hear, about the focus on culture and the change across the organization. I think you probably inspired the rest of the organization as well, and it's something that's that I don't think is necessarily overlooked, just not practiced very well in terms of that proliferating that culture change across the company to make these big things happen. So Simon, I want to just take an opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for being here and having this discussion with us today. Thank you for moving this system to the cloud and transforming my experience as a CBA customer, and really appreciate the time.
No, I loved it. Thank you, Ben.